Hey guys. So I just wanted to kind of do a review of kind of where we are in history when it comes to American literature. Because the history that goes with a lot of this literature helps you understand it. And it's very important because you can't really separate the history in which something was written from the actual text itself. So it becomes really, really important for you guys to remember kind of when things are happening, just basic details. And it'll help you a lot to kind of categorize the text that you're reading, and it'll help you kind of know a couple things before you start reading. So for example, first up we had the colonial period. Remember that was about our Puritan friends. You read one of the 3 poems I posted by Anne Bradstreet, and you read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which I took up for that test grade. So we had a lot of crazy stuff going on with the Puritans, right? We definitely know they were very, very big on religion, and they were definitely talking about or to the self, right? They were always trying to determine if they were part of the elect or not. They wanted to see if they were going to heaven or hell. That was their goal. So a lot of their writing was journals or poetry or things that were written for themselves that ended up later on being published. Jonathan Edwards, of course, that was our second Puritan friend that we read. His big goal was to make sure that his parishioners, his congregation, his church peeps were on the right path, right? So that's what the job of a minister, a priest, a pastor, any of those guys, that's their job, to make sure that their people are on the right track to get where they're trying to go. So he does this text where he's essentially trying to scare his people into getting on the right path because he's afraid for them. If they're not doing what they need to do to get right with God, then, they're not going to go to a place they're going to be too happy. So his goal was to kind of scare them into getting right, which you got to do what you got to do sometimes, right? And it is manipulation, of course, but isn't all language manipulating? Aren't we always trying to get somebody to agree with us? So think of it that way. Once we kind of finished up with our religious Puritans in the colonial era, we kind of moved on to the revolutionary literature, which was also known as the rationalism movement, which is the age of reason. In this particular section, we talked about the guy Patrick Henry. We read his speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." Remember that in this movement, so we started with our individuals, we're moving over to the group. Their goal was to not only separate from Britain and find their freedom, but to do so as a country, as a unit, to be one. So if you notice a lot in Patrick Henry's text, we are seeing that first person plural. So that's going to be that we, us, and our pronouns kind of coming into play, which becomes very, very important in that particular movement, because they're talking about their group. They want to do things as a group, and eventually they do declare independence as a group. Even when you think about the Constitution, it says we the people, not just some people, not just those people, like us, we the people, right? So we definitely see we're moving away from that I feel this, I experience this, to the we need to, blah, 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 we are feeling this way, we are going to do this, which means our next movement obviously moved more into the individual nature of things. So again, that individuality and nature, which if you just watched the review video for Romanticism, Transcendentalism, and Dark Romanticism, you should be on par with me right now. So we had 3 individuals we talked about. We had Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman was a romantic, and he had a poem that we looked at called Song of Myself, which we read an excerpt of, and that excerpt is called I Celebrate Myself and Sing Myself. Remember, that is from the bigger poetry work called Leaves of Grass. We had Edgar Allan Poe, who is notorious for writing really dark poetry and short stories. He's typically known more for his short stories, but I did have you guys read one of his poems if you looked at Dark Romanticism, because I wanted everybody to have a poem for this particular section. I want you guys to get a little bit more practice with poetry. And then finally we have Emily Dickinson, who was a transcendentalist, and she also was known for poetry. A lot of her poems are about this big. They're really small, But typically, small works are even harder to break down than large works, believe it or not. I find you guys start figuring this out about halfway through the semester. When I start giving shorter works, it gets a little bit more overwhelming because you have to look at every single word and every single concept. So it gets a little fishy the shorter the text gets. But we are kind of skipping over in history a couple of movements because first, I just don't have time to cover them properly. I would rather skip over them and not cover them properly, or then not cover them properly, excuse me. So we're going to kind of skip over the Civil War and Reconstruction eras, not because they aren't important, because they are. But we're going to go ahead and skip on to realism. So in the midst of all the stuff we have going on with Romanticism, everything's great, literature's fluffy, they use lots of devices, everything's great. And then all of a sudden, the Civil War hits. So the Civil War did not take place because people were mad about slaves. They were mad that people were telling them what to do with their slaves. So kind of throw that out of your brain that slavery was the reason we had the Civil War, because it wasn't. It was because people were mad that they were getting told what to do. And of course, the North was kind of acting like a big older brother who wants to tell you how to do things. And the South was like, girl, no, I'm going to do what I want. And they kind of started fighting because of those things. And remember, the Civil War was so bad, guys, because we're now officially America, but the only person we're fighting is other Americans. So we only had Americans dying in this war. And it was so bad that family members were against each other. You and your brother could have completely different opinions and be on different sides of it, and actually have ended up in battle against one another, and you could have potentially killed your brother, or your father, or your uncle, or your nephew. Depending on which side of the battle you were on. A lot of families were completely decimated and wiped out because different parts of the family were on different sides of the argument. So, and again, it was all about money and power, and who had those things, who had that control. It really wasn't about slavery, and as awful as that sounds, it was a great outcome, of course, that slavery was abolished, but again, that wasn't the goal. Even though now we remember it as the goal, it really wasn't. So after the Civil War, I mean, during and after the Civil War and the Reconstruction era, we're seeing a lot of letters, we're seeing a lot of poetry talking about just how awful the experiences were. I mean, people died by the thousands, and sometimes it wasn't because they got shot, sometimes it was the after effects of being shot, or they had to have a limb amputated and they ended up getting sick and died. So a lot of things were going on that just weren't quite nice anymore. So people didn't really want to hear about these romantic ideas about how humans are awesome and great and, you know, they're never bad, because at this point people were starting to think, maybe they are a little bad. They started to get more dark romantic than anything else. But they still felt everything was really fluffy and really, like, extra, and they just wanted literature that was going to tell them straight, which is how we kind of end up in the realism era. So the realism movement is more so about reality. They wanted to make literature just like reality. And I am going to be posting some notes for you guys to look over that's going to go over some of this information in more detail. It looks like this, the first page of it. I'm going to give your in-class classmates a little handout. I already went over it with them in class, but they will be getting this handout additionally, just like you're going to get this handout in this video. So the first thing up in your little notes is going to be the historical context. That's your when, where, or in this case, now that we're going on to soapstone, it's going to be your occasion. Remember, all of those are the same thing. Ooh, excuse me. Hiccups are vicious. So that historical context is going to be talking about how the Industrial Revolution kind of changes everything. So after the Civil War, we have this really big industrial boom where they're making a lot of machinery. There's a lot of stuff going on that requires machines more so than humans. So people aren't staying in rural areas like the country anymore. They're not farming and fishing and doing those more like rural area or country area jobs anymore. They're moving to cities where there's more opportunities, and we see the emergence of a large portion of immigrants as well as large portions of people classifying as the middle class. So people aren't just poor or rich anymore. Like, we have a middle class finally that we can kind of say, yep, those people are making it, but they're not struggling. They're not struggling. They're making it. And that becomes really important because now today most of us are classified as middle class. Any of us who are, here enjoying education, we have the ability to do that. So this, again, is a literary movement that kind of is like Romanticism. It has a couple of like tag units that go with it, so a couple of flavors like it does with Romanticism. It also encompasses what's called regionalism. So regionalism is based on the region. So realism is based on kind of reality, making things look like reality. Regionalism is based on a region, a time and a place, a particular time and place. And then we have naturalism, which is kind of like if Romanticism and Transcendentalism and Dark Romanticism were realistic with their focus on nature, instead of just saying nature is the most beautiful thing ever, it's a little bit more realistic than that. It's kind of saying more what it is instead of just making it seem like the best thing since sliced bread. It was, again, developed to kind of get away from the fluffy stuff in Romanticism. It was literally a movement that went against Romanticism. Like, that was essentially their tagline. We're against Romanticism. And a lot of this came about because of the invention of the photograph. So pictures were finally able to be taken, and of course people saw pictures as fact. You can't change a picture, of course. Now we can change pictures a lot. But at the time, there was no editing, there was no changing the filter, you couldn't put a background, you can't have little hard eyes around you. You couldn't have none of that. The picture was it. That was done. Over. And of course, you could still manipulate the perspective a little bit, and you could do certain things, but once the picture was taken, it was done. And this becomes a bigger part into the Great Depression, where we have large quantities of pictures being taken about what's going on in society. But I think that's more of a history class lesson, so I'll leave that to them. Your history teachers like to cover things in history too, not just me. So again, just keep in mind the emergence of the middle class, that ever-growing expansion of cities, and we are seeing this idea called verisimilitude. It is in your notes. It's called verisimilitude, and the whole idea is that realism was trying to achieve that goal, for everything to look and seem just like the truth. It was supposed to be the appearance or semblance of truth or reality. So that's the definition I have for you in your notes. I wanted to read that for you to give it with my own personal definition. So again, that's going to be the 19th century, which is going to be the later 1800s. So we're finishing up Romanticism. We have the Civil War, we have Reconstruction, and then we kind of move into realism. Lord, help me. We have realism kind of moving into the late 1800s, so 1860s-ish, give or take. And it becomes really, really important for a lot of reasons. So not only is it talking about reality, it's also kind of giving a voice to some of the parties that we don't hear from very often, which is going to be people of color, as well as women. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I do try to give you a lot of female writers as well as male writers, and I do try to give you perspectives that are non-white as well, because I want to give you a little bit of everything, and I want you to see writing from all different types of people, from immigrants, from native-born Americans. I want to give you black, white, Indian, native. I want to give you a little bit of everything. That way you can see that American literature is a little bit of everything. We're also going to be reading a female writer for this particular section. The two people that you're normally going to hear related to this movement are going to be Mark Twain and Kate Chopin. We're going to be reading a little bit by Kate Chopin this week. I'm going to give you the option between a few texts. I'm going to have those posted, as well as some audios for those, so you can listen to it if you're not good at reading those little bit lengthier texts with those complicated words. So you're going to see a lot of dialogue or dialect. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the term vernacular. So vernacular language is language that is common to a particular area or place. So for example, we know what DTR means, but people up the road may not. Also saying up the road, you guys know what I mean, but people who live up the road may not know what I mean. So keep that in mind. Things we say and know what they mean are based on our location. So if I lived in Idaho, I may not know what DTR means. DTR may mean something completely different. We don't know. But the whole idea is that this kind of stuff, the place you live, the languages you use, whatnot, show up in your writing. They show up in your speaking, and they show up in all these movements. So realism and regionalism are definitely going to pick up on those vernaculars, and you're going to see that dialect popping up, those vernaculars, those dialects. You're going to see that in the dialogue of the text. So all of the short stories you're going to be reading, whichever one you pick, will have dialogue, and that dialogue will take that regionalism and that reality, that realism into account. So be on the lookout for those things. Let me give you a precise set of dates for regionalism. So regionalism was typically prominent between 1865 and 1895, excuse me. The movement kind of stops in the 1920s. I'll give you one hint on what may have stopped it. The Great Depression. So the Great Depression, guys, kind of put a hold on everything. The only thing that really became super important was photography, because people were worried about their next meal. They weren't worried about reading. They weren't worried about writing, even if they could read and write. They were worried about work. They were worried about surviving. This was just a national disaster, excuse me. But the global war, World War II, kind of pulled us out of it, and we kind of went to work. We, got money flowing back into everything. So as terrible as it sounds, we went from high roll in the 1920s to the worst economic crisis in history for the U.S. In the Great Depression, to a war. A war saved us, as weird as that sounds. And I mean, now we're dealing with global pandemics and whatnot, 100 years later. Crazy stuff, that history. So this stuff will pop up in our literature coming forward. And our regionalism will pop up. So these things don't disappear just because the movement has ended, but their focus kind of shifts. So every movement has its own focus, and that focus shifts to something else. So right now, in this movement that we're discussing, in realism, in regionalism, and in naturalism, excuse me, we have all these things popping up where we're focusing on these different elements. So we're focusing on racism and issues of race. We're focusing on sexism and issues of gender inequality. We're focusing on issues of class and how your social class impacts a lot of things. So if you're middle or lower class, what kind of issues you're experiencing and how that, plays out. When you're looking at regional writers, this is going to be kind of a good guide. You're probably going to have heard of Mark Twain, who is kind of our Western representative for regionalism. And then, of course, you're going to be reading Kate Chopin, who is the representative for the South. Other than that, you don't need to know the other two. They are really good writers. They're really well known, but it's not as dire if you know those. And there are a couple of notes here for naturalism, which I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of just glance over those. We're not going to read any naturalist literature, but it's always good to kind of have a heads up in case they pop up at some other point. And of course here I have a little bit of like a little reminder kind of list in case, because you know, this was a lot. I know that. So here's a little bit of a kind of a recap in case you are interested. So as always, let me know. Now that we're moving into realism, I'm going to give you guys some choices to talk about Kate Chopin and ask you to do a few things with that. We only have really two other movements that we're going to discuss. One of them we've already read our literature for. We're just going to discuss them in context with their movement. And then we're going to move forward. Remember, exams are next week. You will have my exam on Thursday of next week. That's when it will be assigned to you. It will be a cold read assessment, and I will do a practice one with you guys on that Wednesday, review day. So kind of be looking for those things as they pop up. As always, let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. I'm here. I've been doing the Google Meets in the afternoons. No one's been popping on, but I will continue to do those in case you guys have any additional questions. All right, guys, be good.